Corporate Finance Excel Practice Problem. In this presentation, we're going to work a practice problem in Excel related to Economic Order and Quantity, EOQ. This is going to be the second problem of a similar nature in that we'll be calculating the economic order and quantity. Get ready, it's time to take your chance with Corporate Finance. Here we are in Excel. We have our information on the left-hand side. We're going to put that into the blue area into our worksheet on the right-hand side. Note that we have two tabs down below. You may have four tabs if you're working along with us with the practice problem worksheet. Two tabs with the answers to them. Two tabs with the practice problem. We're going to be just working with the practice problems here. Going on to the second tab, you'll see that we have a similar kind of layout, different numbers. So we will be working similar process two times. Back to the first tab, we will be calculating the economic order and quantity using the calculation on the right. Remember that the formula on the right. Remember that the point of the economic order and quantity is to find the optimal ordering point given two factors that we don't typically consider when we're thinking about just how many units we want to order. So in other words, remember, if we're thinking about a year and we're thinking about how many units we need over that year's time period, we will often be thinking about what the cost per unit is to order, and then thinking about how many orders we need to make, applying that out possibly to our sales, how often we make sales throughout the year to think about our optimal ordering process. But we also want to be taking into consideration the cost of us making the order, which can be significant, especially as our company gets larger. So the cost of making the order itself may become more significant due to the bureaucracy of making the order. And so every time we make an order, it might cost us more money, to do so. So if I was to maximize the cost of making the order, and remember that this number is not easy to determine per se, because we have to think about the cost of the time and salary and whatnot it takes to basically process through the bureaucratic process of making an order. And you might be able to pick that up from an industry standard in practice, or pick up the industry standard of how to do that and then calculate it for yourself in your company, because it could change from company to company. So it's probably going to be something you want to pick up. So then if I wanted to minimize this number, if I had 85,000 units that I need for the entire year, I could say, well, if I'm going to lower that number down to zero, I'll just order one time 85,000 units, and that'll bring the ordering price down to zero. If I order two orders, and then this is going to double and whatnot. So we have a fairly small number. I think it's useful to use one for this number, because that can if I use just one, it can make it a little bit easier to see in terms of what's happening with the calculation sometimes. So we'll do two calculations. We're going to have it one here. Oftentimes this will be a fairly low number per order, but depending on the industry we are in, we may make a lot of orders, right? It just depends on what type of industry we're in and how many orders we're going to make. But we can't just make one order, because we have to balance that over the cost of carrying the inventory, which again will differ from industry to industry. Some costs, it'll cost more to carry inventory. We might have spoilage in some industries. We might have theft that could be a problem in industries and whatnot. And just the cost of carrying or warehousing an inventory unit may be more or less. It's not as easy to break that down again, because we're looking for that cost per unit. We may be able to use industry standards to pick up a number for here. But again, we probably want to look at how to pick up that number and then apply it to our particular business, because what we're looking for is the per unit cost to hold on to the unit over the time period, say a year. And that's what we need in order to balance these two things out. So now we'll take that and try to balance these two factors out to see if we were just to consider the balancing of these two factors, what would be the optimal amount or quantity that we would then purchase to come up to the perfect lowest cost, balancing out these two factors. Once we find that, then we can figure out how many orders that we would make over the period, in this case over the year. So our formula is going to be the economic order and quantity. It's going to be the square root of 2 times D. The D is going to be the annual demand in units, or how many units we're going to sell in units that we're going to sell, times S. That's going to be the cost per order, how many times we're going to order, the cost per order, the $1 in our case, divided by H, which is going to be the holding cost, the cost of us to hold on to the one unit over the time period. In this case, we're going to say a year. Oftentimes, this holding cost could be calculated as a percentage of the cost per unit. We don't have that in this case. Just note that you might you might see that sometimes that they might not, calculate the holding cost. They might give you the holding cost, basically a holding percentage of the cost. So we got just the holding cost H here. Then we're going to take the square root of the entire thing. I'm going to break this out into an Excel worksheet, kind of like a tax return or something like that, that would be breaking out this formula. Very useful in practice so that you can come up with kind of worksheets that you can put together, then run scenarios based on this information given on the left-hand side. So it's really useful to do in practice. I think it's good to do for practice problems as well, because you want to kind of memorize this formula, and you can memorize it algebraically and write it down if you had to take a test on it and whatnot. But if you break it down to its components and think about how you would break it down vertically, it may actually help you to memorize this thing. You might be able to see it easier actually vertically, especially if you work with Excel sheets a lot. So I would then, I think it's useful, really useful to do that. So the standard way I would break this down is to say, well, it's a division thing. I'm going to take the numerator, I'm going to put that on the inner column, and then I'm going to break the entire numerator out when I get the calculation for the numerator into the outer column. The denominator is one number, so I'm going to put that in the outer column. So I have the numerator and denominator in the outer column. Then we will take the square root. That's going to be your normal process for breaking a complex formula into like a tax return or vertical calculation that you can then use as a worksheet to run scenarios. So we're going to take the projected unit sales, which we're going to say we're going to sell the 85. Notice I'm not starting with the 2 here. I'm starting with D instead of just saying 2 at the starting point. So I'm going to multiply D times S. So that's going to, and then I'm going to multiply this times the ordering cost per order, which is going to be equal to 1, which of course will give us the subtotal. I'm just going to call this the subtotal. Now I could simply multiply times 2 here, but I like to do it like you would see it in a calculator, one calculation at a time. So I did D times S. Let's put an underline here, home tab, font group, underline. That's not underline, that's italicized. Multiply this out. The 85,000 times 1 is of course the 85,000. Then I'm going to multiply it times 2. I'm not going to name it because that's just what's in the formula here, times 2. Then we're going to take the home tab, font group, underline here. This is going to be a subtotal, or you might call it the numerator. Subtotal. I'm going to put this in the outer column now because this is going to be the entire numerator, which I want the numerator and the denominator to be ending up in the outer column. 85,000 times the 2. Now the denominator is just one number, so I'll put that in the outer column. That's going to be H here, which is the holding cost. So the carrying cost per unit is what we named it here. That's going to be equal to the 1.9. I'm going to add some decimals so we can see the points here. Home tab, numbers, adding a couple decimals, put an underline. Home tab, font group, and underline, and that then is going to give us, I'm going to call it once again a subtotal, because we're still going to have to take the square root. So here's the numerator, denominator, now in the outer column, this being the 170,000 divided by the 1.9, and then I can take that. I could add some decimals just in case it's rounded here, just so you can see it, the rounding of it, so it's a rounded number, and then I'm going to be picking the square root. And the square root, and there's a formula to take the square root, and that'll give us the economic order and quantity. So I'm just going to say this is going to be equal to the SQRT. That's the square root formula. I'm going to double click on it right there, and I'm just going to pick up the 89,473.68, enter. There's the square root. I'm going to add a couple decimals. Home tab, numbers, adding a few decimals. So that means that the optimal number that we would be purchasing at a time is about 299 units to balance out these two things. That would be the optimal number of units. Well, then how many orders would we have to make over the year then? Well, if we had sales for the entire year of the 85,000, that's how many we need for the entire year to meet the sales requirement. Then if we take that and we divide it by what we just calculated, the economic ordering quantity, which we just said was this 299.12. Let's put some decimals here. Home tab, font group, number group, adding some decimals. Let's underline it. Home tab, font, underline. And then we're going to say this is going to be equal to the 85,000 divided by the 299.12. Let's add some decimals there. Home tab, numbers, add a couple decimals. We'll call this the number of orders. So that means we would have to order then about 284 times. So we can basically be ordering 284 orders in order to maximize, because obviously the cost here you can see is fairly low. for us to make the ordering cost. It costs us more per unit to be holding on to the units. So if, you might consider here, this is more like, you might be saying, well, it's more like a just-in-time kind of situation. If it's a situation where the ordering turnaround is pretty quick, then we might have a situation where we want to make a lot more orders and hold on to less inventory at any given time, just given these two factors, right? And so so the other factor we might be considering there is the turnaround time for us to have someone place the order and then make the order if we're purchasing inventory and then selling it, to see if we can trim that down so that we can make sure that we meet the sales when they come in. What's the turnaround time to meet the sales? Because the ordering cost per time is fairly low. Again, holding on to it is more. So we would have then the square root or the number of units to 299 and fairly many orders for the year, the 284 being the optimal point. Okay, so then we can calculate, well, what would the average inventory be? To calculate that, we would be taking the economic ordering quantity we just figured, which is the 299.12. Let's add a decimal or two there. Home tab font group, add a couple decimals, and then we're going to take that, divide it by 2, not 5, but 2, and that's going to give us the average inventory, which is going to be equal to that 299.12 divided by 2. Let's put some decimals here. Home tab number, add a couple decimals. Let's put an underline under the 2, home tab font group, and underline. Then we'll calculate the total costs to order and the carrying costs to see if this is significant. So now we've got the optimal number of orders. Let's see what the actual cost of these are now based on these estimates. So we've got the number of orders, which we said now was the number of orders is going to be this 284. So 284.14. I'm going to add some decimals, home tab numbers, adding a couple decimals, and the ordering cost was, we'll say, times the cost of an order is 1. So that's going to be equal to 1. So if I multiply that out, then we're going to say this is equal to the 284.17 times 1. And adding some decimals, home tab numbers, add a few decimals here. Then this is going to be the ordering cost. Let's do some indentation, selecting these three, going to the home tab and the alignment indenting, selecting this one, home tab alignment indenting, and then I'm going to be picking up the carrying cost. And now the carrying cost colon is going to be the average inventory. The average inventory we got up top here is going to be equal to this number. I'm going to add some decimals, going to the home tab numbers, adding a few decimals, and then we're going to have the carrying cost per unit. Carrying cost per unit, 190. This equals the 190. Let's add some decimals there. Home tab numbers, adding a few decimals. Let's underline it while we're here. Home tab font group, underline it. Then if we were to multiply those two out, we got the 149.56 times the 190. Add a few decimals here. Home tab numbers, add a few decimals. This is going to be then the carrying cost. Then we'll do some formatting, selecting these three cells. Home tab, alignment, increase the indenting. Selecting this cell, home tab, alignment, increase the indenting. That should give us the total cost to order and carry inventory. And we could sum this up equals the sum of these two. And we're going to go ahead and underline here, home tab, font, and underline. And there we have that. All right, so that was good times. Let's do it again. We're going to go on to the practice 2 now. Practice 2, we have a different set of numbers, but same kind of process here. So we got the projected units now are going to be 160,000. So we got the more units. The ordering cost, it takes us more time and more cost to order them. So it's $8. So now this is becoming more significant, while the carrying cost is less compared to the ordering cost, the carrying cost per unit, though. The ordering cost, how many orders that we have. So again, if we were to think about this, you guys say, okay, I need 160,000 units. What if I wanted to lower my ordering costs as far as possible? Well, it costs $88 per order. I can order all 160,000 units in day one of the year and only pay $8 for the ordering processing cost of it. But I can't do that if I want, because then I have to balance that against the carrying cost per unit, which is 4, the cost of us holding on to the inventory. So how can I then, what can I think about in terms of how to balance these two items out? That's going to be our formula here, the economic ordering quantity to figure out the ordering size that will be optimal. The ordering size being optimal can then help us to figure out the number of orders that we would need in order to meet the 160,000 total units we need in this case, if we order an optimal size. So that's going to be the formula, square root 2 times D times S. D is the annual demand, how many units we need over the year in this case. S, the cost per unit, the cost per order, how much it costs per order, 8 in our case, divided by H, which is going to be that holding cost, the cost of us holding on to 1 unit, which we're going to have to figure somehow, 1 unit cost over the period, which in this case is going to be a year. Sometimes this is calculated as a percentage of the cost of the inventory, just as simple what the cost of the inventory is. In this case, it's given to us at simply 4. All right, so we're going to break this out. Once again, practice breaking out a formula like this into a worksheet. I think it's really useful to do. We're going to end up with the outer column having the numerator and the denominator. Then we'll take the square root of it. The inner columns will then be used to figure the inner calculations for the numerator and denominator. So I'm going to then say, all right, then we're going to break this out. I'm going to start not with 2, but D, which is going to be the annual demand. So I'm going to say the annual demand, or the projected units we need in our case, is going to be in the inner column of the 160,000. I'm going to multiply that times the ordering cost per unit. That's going to be S, the cost per unit for ordering. And that's going to be 8. It costs us $8 per order. Let's put an underline here, home tab, font group, underline. I'm just going to call this a subtotal. Once again, we could multiply times 2, but I like to see that subtotal. I do one thing at a time. I'm going to multiply those 2 out, then I'm going to do the next thing. So it's going to be the 160,000 times 8. That's a subtotal of the 1,280,000. Then I'm just going to simply multiply times 2, which is, of course, picking this item up. Home tab, font group, and underline. That's going to give us another subtotal, or we can call it the numerator if you so choose, because that's going to be the numerator, which is why I'm putting it in the outer column as we take the 1,280,000 and multiply it then times 2. So now we've got the numerator. The denominator is going to be this H, or the holding cost, which we call the carrying costs per unit. I'm going to put that in the outer column because there's only one number for it. That's going to be 4. Let's underline that by going to the home tab, font group, and underline. And then we're going to divide this out. This is going to be the 2560, the numerator, over 4, the denominator. Looks like it's even here, so I don't think we need any decimals. If I check it out, no decimals necessary. That's good. That's nice. And that's going to be a subtotal because we have to then take the square root. I'm going to call this the square root so people can see what we are doing. This is the end of the calculation, and therefore it is the economic order quantity. So there's a square root formula equals SQRT. SQRT stands for square root. Double clicking on that, we're going to pick up the 640,000, and there's our $800. Let's see if there's any decimals here. I think that's nice and even for us. Nice and even this time. That's nice. Let's put an underline here, home tab, font group, and underline. So we want to order 800 units every time we make an order. And if we order 800 units, how many times do we need to make an order to meet the 160,000 units that we project we need over the time period, in this case, a year? Well, to do that, we would just take the projected units over the time period, in this case, a year, which is going to be that 160,000. And we're going to divide that by what we calculated, economic order quantity. So if we order 800 units like each time, then how many orders do we need? 160,000 divided by the 800, 200 orders. That's what we're going to need, 200 orders, right? Because obviously the 200 times the 800 means we get to the 160, which is what we needed for the entire year. So then we have, this is going to be the number of orders. Then we can calculate the average inventory if we so choose. And we do choose to do that. So let's do it. We're going to say this is going to be the economic order quantity, which is going to be 800. We're going to divide that by 2, and that's going to give us our average inventory, which will be equal to the 800 divided by the 2, 400. Underline home tab font group and underline, and then let's just calculate what the total cost to order and carry inventory would then be. We can just figure this one out, and we're going to say, all right, well, now the ordering cost, colon, we have the number of orders we calculated up top, which we said the number of orders is 200, and then we're going to multiply that times the cost per order, which is this one, and that happened to be equal to 8. Cost is $8 per order. So I'm going to put that on the outside. This is going to be equal to the 200 times 8. And that's going to be called the ordering cost. Ordering cost. Let's put some indentations. Selecting these 3. Home tab alignment. Increase the indenting. This one now. Home tab alignment. Increase the indenting. Then we want the carrying cost. Carrying cost. Colon. And for that, we're going to pick up the average inventory. That's going to be equal to the 400. And then that costs us $4, which is the carrying cost per unit, which is going to be equal to $4. And that's going to give us then the carrying cost in the outer column equal to the 400 times 4. And that finally gives us the total cost to order and carry inventory, summing up the outer column of these 2 items. And we'll put some underlines here. I'm going to do this all at one time. I want an underline here, holding down control, underline there, holding down control, underline there, holding down control, letting go of control. 3 non-adjacent cells that are highlighted. We're going to underline them all at the same time. Home tab, font group, underline. There we have it. And so that is it. So again, hopefully you can see that how this formula can be useful as basically part of our projection when we're thinking about how many units to be purchasing and seeing whether or not these costs are significant, and then how to balance them.